Hello, welcome to the video series on coordinate geometry. It's also called geometry of lines. In this part of this, in this first part of the video series, so we are going to look at gradient of a line. But before we start that, let me outline what we are going to do in this video series. First, we look at gradients of a line. Gradient of a line. Then we look at the midpoint of a line. So like coordinate of midpoint of a line. Then we look at distance between 2 points. Distance between 2 points. Then we look at equation of a line. Equation of a line. Then we look at parallel and perpendicular lines. Parallel and perpendicular lines. Then we look at intersecting lines. So now in gradient, we'll be looking at how to calculate the gradient of a line when you have the coordinates of 2 points that the line passes through. Then for the midpoint, so you might be asked to find the coordinate of the midpoint of the line joining 2 points. So if you know 2 points, can you determine the midpoint of the line that passes through those 2 points? Then also we look at distance between 2 points when you have coordinate of 2 points. So how do you calculate the length of the line that connects the 2 points? Then we look at the equation of a line. How can you write an equation that describes that line? Then parallel and perpendicular lines. So what is the relationship between the gradient of 2 parallel lines and also the relationship between the gradient of 2 perpendicular lines? And then we look at intersecting lines. So when 2 lines intersect, can you determine the coordinate of the point where the 2 lines intersect? Okay, so let's start with the first part, gradient of a line. Gradient of a line. So what do we mean by gradients? So before we go to gradient of a line, I'll quickly do a quick revision on how to locate coordinates on the Cartesian, an XY Cartesian plane. Let's say you have the Cartesian coordinate system. So you know here you have this as positive y and negative y. Then you have this as negative x, and this is positive x. So let's say you have a point. If you have a point, a single point is described by a coordinate that has both x and y parts. So it is ordered, the x always comes before y. So which means if you are given a coordinate, the first number is the x coordinate and the second one is the y coordinates. So let's assume you have this point A, so you have 2, 3, and you have point B, this is a -1, 4, and you have another point C, -2, -1. So you have to locate these points. So let me calibrate the point. Let's say this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you have this 1, 2, 3, 4. This -1, -2, -3, for example. Then -1, -2, -3, -4. So how do you locate point A? So these 2 will be x, and these 3 will be y. So you go to 2 on the x. So on the x-axis, you go to point 2, positive 2. Then on the y, you keep going because the y is positive 3. So you keep going towards the positive y until you get to 3. So the point of intersection of the two lines will give you the point A. So this is 2, 3. Then point B, x is -1. That's the coordinate of x, and 4 is the coordinate of y. So you go to -1 on the x-axis, and you keep going up because you have a positive number here until you meet y equals 4. So that is the point. This is point B, and it has a coordinate of -1, 4. Then for point C, x is -2 and y is -1. So you go to -2 on x and -1 on y. So we are at -2 on x. So I go down because I have negative y. So I keep going down until I get to -1 on the y. So that will give me that point, C, -2, -1. Okay. So that's how to locate those points. Now let's go to gradients. So if you have a line, how do you determine the gradient of the line, given 2 points that the line passes through? So let's say I have the coordinate system, and I have a line, and I know, so let's say you have a graph for the line. This is y and x. So, and you are told to determine the gradient of the line. So what do we mean by gradient? So gradient is basically the steepness of that line relative to the horizontal. Basically, that's the way I'll explain it. So if I want to forget, let's say I have different lines. Let me draw another line. So let me use a different color here. So I have another line that is like that. Okay, let me use. I have another line that goes like that. Then I have another line that goes like that. So if I ask you which of these lines has the highest gradient, so how do you know? So if you draw a horizontal line for each of these, if I want to look at it relative to the horizontal, I will see that this one is steeper than this one, and this one is steeper than this one. The blue one is steeper than the black one, and the black one is steeper than the red one. Another way you can look at it is by looking at the angle that the line makes with the horizontal. You can see if I call this theta black, theta blue, I call this theta black, and I call this theta red. You can see clearly that the theta blue is greater than theta black and is greater than theta red. So it shows that the gradient of this line is greater than the gradient of this line, and is greater than the gradient of that line. So that's basically what gradient means. The steepness of the line relative to the horizontal. Now, if you have the graph and you have to determine the gradient of that line, so what you need to do is to pick any 2 points on the line. Let's say I pick this point. I call this point 1, and I pick another point here. I call it point 2. So what I need is the coordinate of this point 1. What do I mean by the coordinate? I go to that point, then I trace where that line falls on the x. So this is the coordinate of this point on the x-axis. So this becomes my x1 because it's the x 4.1. And this becomes my y1, that is the y 4.1. So if I go to the second point and trace it down to the x-axis, I can get x2, because the x coordinate of that point 2, and also I can get the y coordinate of point 2. So to get the gradient, so what I do is to use the formula gradient equals rise over run, which is also equal to change in y divided by change in x. So what do I mean by rise? That means how high will this line run upwards, or how it has risen up. So the rise is basically this distance, and the run is basically this distance. So how the horizontal distance from this point to the other point. So how do I get this? The length of this point, the rise, is basically this. So if I know this length, and I'm looking for, and I know this length, so how do I get this length? I just subtract this from this, and that will give me this. So which means this will be x2 minus x1. So that's how I'll get that length. So if I want to get this length also, it means that from here to here, I know as y2, and from here to here, I know it as y1. It means that this length will be y2 minus y1. So that is the rise. So if I want to get a gradient, it means that the gradient would be the rise, which is the vertical distance between the 2 points, y2 minus y1, divided by the run, which is the horizontal distance between the 2 points, x1 minus x2. So that's the formula for gradient, y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. So this is also equal to change in y over change in x. That's another way of saying it. So the change in the y coordinate divided by the change in the x coordinates. So that's the formula for calculating gradient. Hope that makes sense. So let's look at some examples. Examples. The question is, find the gradient of the line. Find the gradient of the line joining each pair of points below. So you have a 1, 1, and 3, 5. You have B minus 4, 6, and 2, 5. Then you have C minus 1 over 3 half, and half minus 1 over 4. So let's solve those. Now the first one, A, you have to find a gradient. So gradient is basically y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I need to determine which one I want to make my point 1 and which one I want to make my point 2. So let's say I make this point 1 and this point 2. It doesn't matter which one. If I like, I can make this 1 and this 2. You get the same thing. You have to be consistent. Now, y2, that's the coordinate, the y coordinate of point 2, which is 5. That'll be 5 minus y1, the y coordinate of point 1 is 1, divided by x2, the x coordinate of point 2, that's 3, minus the x coordinate of point 1, 1. So that gives 4 over 2, and that will give me 2 at the right. Okay, so that's the gradient of the line that connects these 2 points. Then the second question, you have, so gradient will be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and that will be, so if I call this point 1, point 2 this time around, and this point 1, then my y2 will be 6 minus 5 divided by, then my x2 will be minus 4, and my y2 will be 2. My x1 will be 2. So that gives me 1 over minus 6. So the gradient is basically minus 1 over 6. Then the third one, gradient is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if I make this point 1 and I make this point 2, so my y2 will be minus 1 over 4. Then my y1 will be half, and all over x2 will be half, and x1 will be minus 1 over 3. Minus 1 over 3. So I have to put in brackets. Because the sign will multiply this sign. So what do I get? Minus 1 over 4 minus half. So I'll have minus 1 over 4. So I'm going to deal with the numerator first. So I'll have, so what do I do here? If I make the denominators the same, I can multiply this by 2 and multiply this by 2. So that gives me minus 1 over 4 minus 2 over 4, which gives me minus 3 over 4. Then for the denominator, I have 1 over 2. So minus and minus will give me plus 1 over 3. So if I make the denominators the same, I can multiply this by 3 and this by 3. Whatever I do to the numerator, I will do the same thing to the denominator. So I can multiply this by 2 and this by 2. So that gives me 3 over 6 plus 2 over 6. And that gives me 5 over 6. Now I have the numerator as minus 3 over 4 and the denominator as 5 over 6. So minus 3 over 4, 5 over 6. So the gradient will be minus 3 over 4 divided by 5 over 6. Minus 3 over 4, 5 over 6. So, and that will be minus 3 over 4 divided by 5 over 6 is equal to minus 3 over 4 times 6 over 5. And that gives me, so 2 can go here, 2 can go here, 3. That gives me minus 9 over 10. So that's the gradient of the line. So let's look at one more example. We have, the question is, what is the value of P? So what is the value of P if the gradient of the line joining minus 1P and P4 is 2 over 3? So that's the question. So how do we deal with this? So we are given the gradient this time. The gradient equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now I know the gradient as 2 over 3, so I can replace gradient with 2 over 3. So I need to identify which point I want to make my point 1 and which point I want to make my point 2. If I make this point 1 and I make this point 2, it means that my y2 is 4 and my y1 is p and my x2 is p and my x1 is minus 1. So my gradient 2 over 3 will be equal to y2 4 minus y1 p all over x2 p minus x1 minus 1. So I'll have 2 over 3 equals 4 minus p over p plus 1. So I cross multiply, I'll have 2 into p plus 1 equals 3 into 4 minus p. So I expand that, 2p plus 2 equals 12 minus 3p. So if I collect like terms, I have 2p plus 3p equals, so I'll move this to the left, the negative becomes positive on this side, then I move 2 to the other side, so 12 minus 2 becomes negative there. So I have 5p equals 10, then I divide both sides by 5, so 5 cancels that, and 5 here, 2. So p equals 2. I hope that makes sense. So we stop there and we continue in the next part of the video. Bye-bye.